In the ancient world, Egypt stood as one of the greatest civilizations to ever exist. Its towering pyramids, golden temples, and powerful pharaohs made it legendary. But behind the stories of male rulers, there were queenswomen of power, ambition, and wisdom who shaped the kingdom from within. These women were not just wives or decorations in the palace. They were leaders, advisors, mothers, and sometimes even pharaohs in their own right. They walked through the same temples, wore the same crowns, and made decisions that changed the course of history. Yet, over time, many of them were forgotten. Their names were scratched out from the walls. Their statues were broken. Why? Because the world feared powerful women. Kings and priests wanted their glory remembered, not the women who once stood beside or above them. But time cannot fully erase truth. The desert remembers. The ruins remember. And now, we will remember too. This chapter opens the door to their world. A world where queens once ruled with pride, love, strength, and where many met tragic ends. These are the women whose stories deserve to be told once more. When people think of queens in ancient times, they often imagine someone who stood quietly next to her husband, dressed in jewels, saying little, and smiling politely. But in ancient Egypt, many queens were far more than that. Some were the real power behind the throne. Others ruled when no man could. And some took the throne for themselves, challenging every rule of tradition. These women signed royal documents, advised in courtrooms, led ceremonies, and even gave commands to armies. Their intelligence, courage, and leadership saved Egypt more than once. One such queen dressed as a man to become pharaoh, because only men were accepted in that role. Others were priestesses who held spiritual control over the temples, guiding both the people and the gods. These weren't just royal partners. These were rulers in every sense of the word, but history often forgets them. They were hidden behind the shadows of kings. Today, we uncover their names and bring back their voices, because these women were not born to simply support, they were born to lead. Being a queen in ancient Egypt was not a life of comfort. Yes, they lived in palaces, wore fine linen, and had servants, but their position came with constant fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of poison, fear of being replaced. Every step was watched, every decision judged. In the royal court, everyone wanted power, and anyone could be your enemy, even your own blood. Queens had to be careful with their words, their friendships, even their own children. They knew that one wrong move could lead to exile or death. Many queens lived with the pressure of producing sons, because a male heir meant survival. Those who couldn't often faced shame, gossip, or worse, execution. And if a queen became too powerful, men around her would try to take her down. They would call her a witch, accuse her of black magic, or say she was cursed. These were not fairy tale lives. These were women who ruled while walking a thin line between glory and death. Their crowns weren't just gold, they were heavy with fear, fire, and responsibility. Ancient Egypt was a land deeply rooted in magic, gods, and rituals. The people believed that everything from the Nile's floods to a child's birth was connected to the spirit world. Queens, especially, were seen as close to the gods. Many were priestesses before becoming royals. They performed sacred ceremonies, spoke to oracles, and gave offerings to gain favor from the divine. But not all magic was light. Some queens were believed to use dark rituals to protect their power or punish enemies. In stories whispered through generations, there are tales of queens who called upon curses, who wore amulets soaked in blood, and who vanished after performing forbidden rites. Whether true or not, the fear of their magic added to their power. It made people respect them and fear them. These women knew the art of combining belief, fear, and ritual into a force that no sword could cut. To rule in Egypt, a queen needed more than intelligence. She needed mystery. She needed magic. And some, it seems, truly had it. You may wonder why tell these stories now. These queens lived thousands of years ago. Their kingdoms have fallen. Their palaces are dust. But their stories still breathe. Because even today, women around the world face battles for power, respect, and survival. These ancient queens walked paths that are still familiar, fighting to be heard, struggling to lead, and often punished for their strength. Their lives remind us that power comes with a price. That leadership is rarely easy. That even in the oldest times, women dared to break rules written by men. And though many of these queens were erased from history, we now have the chance to remember them, to speak their names, to tell their stories not as footnotes in a king's tale, but as legends of their own. Their rise was glorious, their fall heartbreaking, but their legacy, it still inspires, and this is just the beginning. Hatshepsut was born into royalty, the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I. From the start, she was surrounded by power, luxury, and the divine air of Egypt's royal court. But being a princess in ancient Egypt didn't mean she was expected to rule. That path was reserved for her brothers or future husband. Still, even as a child, Hatshepsut was different. She was confident, intelligent, and deeply curious about politics, religion, and the workings of the state. People in the palace whispered about how she behaved more like a prince than a princess. She paid attention to how her father ruled, how the priests moved, and how decisions were made. Hatshepsut didn't just dream of power, she studied it. While other girls played with dolls, she stood in the halls of the temple, listening to priests chant prayers to Amun. Her father saw this strength in her, and perhaps deep down, he knew this girl was not just born to support a king. She was born to become one. After her father's death, her half-brother, Thutmose II, took the throne, and Hatshepsut married him, as was common to keep royal bloodlines pure. She became queen, but real power still belonged to her husband. Then, fate struck. Thutmose II died young, leaving behind a very young son, Thutmose III, too young to rule. Suddenly, Egypt needed a leader. Hatshepsut stepped forward as regent, a caretaker ruler until the boy grew up. At first, she played the expected role, quiet, respectful, temporary. But Egypt faced threats. Trade was uncertain. Temples were weakening. Hatshepsut saw the chaos and made a bold decision. She would not just guide the throne, she would take it. In an age where no woman had ever dared such a move, she crowned herself pharaoh, not queen, not regent. Pharaoh, the most powerful title in the land. She dressed in men's royal clothes, wore the false beard of kings, and ordered her statues to show her as a man, not because she wanted to become one, but because it was the only way the people would accept her rule. And they did. Hatshepsut wasn't just a ruler in name. She became one of Egypt's greatest builders and leaders. She launched huge construction projects, building temples and monuments that still stand today. The most famous is her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, a masterpiece carved into a cliff, surrounded by columns and ramps that seem to touch the sky. Under her reign, Egypt was peaceful and rich. Trade routes reopened, Gold flowed in from Nubia. Incense came from the mysterious land of Punt, and temples were filled with offerings. She made decisions not with fear, but with vision. Her rule brought prosperity and stability, and her people respected her. She honored the gods, respected tradition, but also dared to do what no other woman had done. Her leadership proved that strength didn't come from gender. It came from wisdom, action, and belief. For over 2 decades, Hatshepsut ruled Egypt with grace, intelligence, and unmatched ambition. She showed the world what a woman in power could achieve if only given the chance. When Hatshepsut died, she was buried in the Valley of the Kings among pharaohs, not queens. Her rule had been one of peace and prosperity, but even in death, her power made others uncomfortable. Thutmose III, the boy she once ruled for, eventually became pharaoh. Years later, someone likely on his command tried to erase Hatshepsut from history. Her name was chiseled off monuments. Her statues were broken. Her images were defaced. It was as if someone wanted to pretend she never ruled, never wore the crown, never changed the face of Egypt. For centuries, historians didn't even know she existed. Her story was buried under layers of stone and silence. But in the 19th century, archaeologists uncovered the truth. Piece by piece, they brought her memory back. The shattered statues, the damaged temples, they all whispered her name again. Hatshepsut had returned, not in flesh, but in legacy, in memory, in awe. Hatshepsut's story is more than just history. It's a mirror to our world. Even today, many women face the same struggles she did, being doubted, being judged, being told that leadership is not their place. But like her, many still rise. Her life is proof that greatness doesn't ask for permission, that sometimes the boldest path is the one never walked before. She ruled in a time when women were expected to stay silent, but she raised her voice. She led when no one believed she could, but she did anyway. And even when they tried to erase her, her story found its way back. Hatshepsut was not just Egypt's first female pharaoh. She was a symbol of courage, vision, and unstoppable strength. And as we move forward in this journey through Egypt's forgotten queens, her spirit will guide us. Because once you hear her story, you understand one thing: real power never truly disappears. It waits to be remembered. Nefertiti's name is often tied to beauty. Her famous bust, with its elegant features and regal crown, is one of the most recognized images of ancient Egypt. But behind that timeless face was a queen who helped lead a revolution. She was not just a beautiful wife, she was a partner in power. She stood beside Pharaoh Akhenaten during one of the most controversial periods in Egyptian history. Together, they tried to change the country's entire religion, a move that shook the foundation of the kingdom. Nefertiti didn't stand in the background. In carvings and wall paintings, she appears as Akhenaten's equal. She's shown giving offerings to the gods, wearing the pharaoh's crown, and sometimes even in positions of command. Her beauty was real, but it was her strength, her presence, and her daring spirit that made her unforgettable. Egypt had never seen a queen quite like her, and it hasn't since. At a time when Egypt worshipped dozens of gods, Nefertiti and Akhenaten made a bold and dangerous move. They declared that only one god should be worshipped: Aten, the sun disk. They shut down temples, removed powerful priests, and tried to erase the names of old gods from walls and texts. It was a religious revolution, and one that made many enemies. The people were confused. The priests were furious. Changing centuries of belief was not just a spiritual risk, it was political suicide. But through it all, Nefertiti remained by Akhenaten's side. Some historians believe she was the real mind behind the movement, guiding her husband with calm determination. Others say she was the balancing force, keeping his vision from turning into madness. Either way, her influence was clear. She wasn't just part of the new religion, she was its living symbol. In the city of Amarna, built by Akhenaten for this new faith, Nefertiti was everywhere, in statues, in inscriptions, in public ceremonies. She was not a shadow of her husband. She was his mirror, and, sometimes, his leader. As time passed, something strange happened. Nefertiti suddenly disappeared from records. Her name, once everywhere, vanished. Some believe she died. Others think she fell out of favor. But one theory suggests something even more powerful, that Nefertiti didn't die. She became pharaoh. According to some researchers, a mysterious ruler named Nefertiti appeared during the final years of Akhenaten's reign. This ruler used titles and language, similar to what Nefertiti once used. Was this her? Did she rule Egypt alone, hidden behind a new name? It's possible. Some say she wore the full pharaonic regalia and led the empire after Akhenaten's death. If true, this would make her one of the very few women in history to rule Egypt as pharaoh, just like Hatshepsut before her. But unlike Hatshepsut, Nefertiti's solo reign, if it happened, left almost no clear trace. No grand tomb, no long inscriptions. Just a trail of clues that historians still chase today. Her story is like a puzzle pieces scattered in the sand, waiting to be put together. One of the greatest mysteries in Egyptology is, what happened to Nefertiti? For a queen so present, so powerful, her sudden disappearance feels like a hole in history. No official tomb has ever been found. No mummy has ever been confirmed as hers. It's as if she simply vanished. Some say she was buried in secret to protect her from enemies. Others believe her tomb is still hidden inside King Tutankhamun's burial site, waiting to be uncovered. There are even those who suggest she was erased on purpose, just like Hatshepsut, by those who hated the religious changes she helped bring. The truth remains uncertain. What we do know is that after her disappearance, Egypt quickly returned to its old gods. Her city of Amarna was abandoned. Her religion collapsed. Her statues were destroyed. And yet, her image, the famous bust, survived. It became a global icon. Her face still looks out at us from museums, as if watching from the past. But behind those eyes is a story still unfinished. Nefertiti's story doesn't end with her last appearance on temple walls. In fact, her legend only grew stronger over time. She has become a symbol of grace, mystery, and silent power. Her name means, "The Beautiful One has come." But beauty was only the beginning of what made her great. She was brave enough to challenge centuries of belief. Wise enough to lead beside one of history's most radical kings, and strong enough perhaps to rule alone in a time when women were rarely allowed to speak, let alone command. Her life reminds us that history is not always clear, that some of the most powerful people leave behind questions, not answers, and that sometimes vanishing is not a weakness, it's part of the legend. Nefertiti may have disappeared, but she was never truly lost. Her story still lives, whispered through the ruins of Amarna, carved into broken stone, and reflected in the eyes of those who seek truth in forgotten places. She was more than a queen. She was a question that still echoes in the silence of ancient tombs. Queen Tiye was not born a princess. She didn't come from the traditional royal bloodline. Her father was a wealthy landowner, and her mother was believed to be a priestess. In most ancient kingdoms, a woman from such a background would never become queen, but Egypt was different. When Prince Amenhotep III saw Tiye, he didn't just see beauty, he saw brilliance. He married her not for politics or power, but for love, and that decision changed the course of Egyptian history. Tiye was strong, confident, and educated. She knew how to read, write, and debate. She understood the politics of the palace, the influence of the temples, and the moods of the people. And as soon as she became queen, she proved she wasn't there to sit quietly. She stood beside the king in public, appeared in official documents, and even had her own royal seal, something almost unheard of for a queen at the time. Tiye wasn't born royal, but she was born to rule. Amenhotep III ruled during one of Egypt's most luxurious and peaceful periods. But that peace didn't come on its own. Tiye was deeply involved in managing the affairs of the kingdom. Foreign leaders wrote to her directly, seeking her approval and guidance. She advised the king on politics, religion, and diplomacy. And unlike many queens who stayed behind palace walls, Tiye joined the pharaoh on state visits, festivals, and diplomatic meetings. She wasn't a background figure, she was a partner in power. While her husband enjoyed the riches of the court, Tiye kept her eyes on the bigger picture. She helped stabilize Egypt's influence across borders and maintained strong relationships with surrounding kingdoms. Her presence gave Egypt a rare balance, strength and wisdom in both king and queen. And when the king began to age, it was Tiye who kept the empire steady. Her mind worked quietly, but its reach was wide. She didn't wear the crown herself, but she didn't need to. She had something even greater: control. Tiye's influence didn't end with her husband. When Amenhotep III died, their son, Amenhotep IV, took the throne. But he would soon become known as Akhenaten, the same radical king who changed Egypt's religion forever. Many historians believe that Tiye shaped her son's ideas about the gods, the court, and the people from a young age. She wasn't just a mother, she was his guide. Even after he became king, Tiye remained a powerful presence in the royal court. She moved with dignity, gave counsel, and held the title of Great Royal Wife with pride. When her son launched his religious revolution, Tiye didn't publicly oppose him, but she also didn't fully disappear into the background. Some say she tried to soften his radical edges. Others believe she helped him handle the backlash from angry priests and nobles. What is clear is that Akhenaten respected her deeply. He even built a palace for her in the new capital city of Amarna. Few queens in history have influenced both a husband and a son who sat on the throne, and even fewer have done it with such quiet strength. Tiye's presence was not only felt in the court, it was seen across Egypt. Statues of her were built in temples, often the same size as the king's. This was rare and powerful. It told the world, this woman is equal to the pharaoh. Foreign rulers addressed her as an authority figure. In letters discovered in Amarna, kings from other lands sent her greetings, gifts, and political requests. She was admired not only for her wisdom, but also for her calm leadership. Tiye was also deeply religious. She helped promote the worship of new forms of deities and gave offerings in massive public ceremonies. Her image appears on walls in temples, and her jewelry has been found buried with care and honor. All of this points to one truth. Tiye wasn't just important, she was essential. In a time when women were expected to remain in the background, she walked beside kings and changed the way power moved through the palace. Queen Tiye didn't lead armies. She didn't wear the pharaoh's crown. She didn't change the gods or fight battles in the open, but she ruled in her own way through influence, wisdom, and quiet strength. Her fingerprints are found on everything her husband built and everything her son tried to change. And even after her death, her name was spoken with respect. In a world that often judged women by their titles or bloodlines, Tiye proved that true power doesn't need a crown. It only needs a mind strong enough to guide a kingdom. Her story is one of grace, patience, and impact. She is a reminder that not all rulers lead from the front. Some do it from the shadows with just as much force. Today, Queen Tiye stands as a symbol of what a woman can become when she refuses to be defined by where she came from. She was a queen, a wife, a mother, and above all, a force that shaped Egypt forever. Ankhesenamun was born into the royal family during a time of chaos. She was the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, raised during her father's religious revolution when Egypt's traditions were flipped upside down. She grew up in the city of Amarna, surrounded by the belief that only one god Aten should be worshipped. But that world didn't last. After Akhenaten's death, the temples of old gods reopened, the priests regained power, and the new religion collapsed. In the middle of all this stood a young girl, royal by birth, but shaken by the collapse of everything she knew. At around 13 years old, she was married to her half-brother, the famous boy King Tutankhamun. He was barely 9. Their marriage was less about love and more about restoring balance to the kingdom. Together, they were expected to heal Egypt's wounds. But they were just children in a world filled with old men and dangerous politics. Though Tutankhamun is often remembered for his golden tomb and tragic death, Ankhesenamun stood quietly behind him, holding the weight of royal duty on her young shoulders. She supported the return to traditional gods, helped repair broken alliances with priests and nobles, and tried to provide stability to a kingdom still recovering from her father's reforms. In paintings, she is shown standing beside the king, gently guiding him, holding him by the arm, or offering him lotus flowers, symbols of peace and rebirth. These images suggest a strong emotional bond between the two. Some historians believe that they truly loved each other, despite the political nature of their marriage. They suffered together too. Records show that Ankhesenamun may have had multiple miscarriages. Tiny mummies of stillborn daughters were found in Tutankhamun's tomb, believed to be their children. This quiet pain of losing children, of watching her husband fall ill, of seeing the court plot around them must have been crushing. But Ankhesenamun remained composed, graceful, and present. She may have been young, but she was not weak. When Tutankhamun died suddenly at around age 18, Ankhesenamun's world collapsed. She was only about 21, already a widow, and now surrounded by powerful men who saw her as a tool, not a person. She had no surviving children to secure her position, and as the last surviving member of the royal bloodline, her body became the prize in a dangerous game. The priests and generals wanted control of the throne, and that meant controlling her. One man in particular, an older advisor, and likely her grandfather, rose quickly in power. He wanted to marry Ankhesenamun to legitimize his claim to the throne, but she resisted. Desperate and afraid, She did something no Egyptian queen had ever done before she wrote to a foreign enemy. A letter was discovered, sent to the king of the Hittites, Egypt's rival to the north. In it, she begged him to send one of his sons to marry her. She promised no trick. She was honest about her fear and her need for protection. Her plea was clear: "I do not wish to take a servant as my husband." The Hittite king agreed. He sent one of his sons to Egypt, likely hoping to place his own blood on the Egyptian throne. But the plan failed. The young prince was murdered on the way, almost certainly by someone in the Egyptian court, someone who didn't want Ankhesenamun to escape their control. After that, she vanished from history. There are no clear records of what happened to her. Most likely, she was forced to marry the very man she feared. In tomb paintings, he is shown performing funeral rites for Tutankhamun, wearing the crown of Pharaoh. Ankhesenamun is not pictured. Her name was removed from many inscriptions, as if someone wanted to erase her completely. No confirmed tomb has ever been found. No mummy, no monument, no final resting place. She simply disappeared, leaving behind only the echo of her pain and her bravery in that one letter, a cry for help that came too late. Ankhesenamun's story is heartbreaking because it is so human. She was born into power but lived most of her life without real control. She loved and lost. She tried to survive in a world that saw her as a symbol, not a soul. Her life was shaped by politics, religion, fear, and betrayal. And yet, even in her darkest moment, she dared to ask for help from outside the system. She broke the rules in an attempt to save herself. That takes courage. That takes strength. Her story is a reminder that not all queens wore crowns with confidence. Some wore them with quiet suffering. And while Egypt may have tried to forget her, we remember. We remember the girl who became a queen, the queen who became a widow, and the widow who vanished into the shadows of history. In this journey through Egypt's queens, Ankhesenamun stands as a symbol of silent power, the kind that suffers, endures, and still reaches out in hope. Cleopatra VII was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family that had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years since the time of Alexander the Great. Although they sat on the Egyptian throne, most Ptolemies didn't speak the local language or fully connect with the Egyptian people. Cleopatra changed that. From a young age, she showed signs of being different. She was intelligent, observant, and highly educated. She learned philosophy, science, politics, and languages, reportedly speaking 9 of them, including Egyptian, making her the first in her family to do so. But her kingdom was falling apart. Egypt was rich, but weak, surrounded by Roman power, threatened by internal conflicts, and weighed down by palace betrayals. Cleopatra was born into a time of crisis. Even her family was dangerous siblings who fought for the crown, uncles who plotted in the shadows. But Cleopatra wasn't afraid. She was ready to rule, and she would use everything she had, her mind, her voice, and yes, her beauty to save her throne. At just 18 years old, Cleopatra became co-ruler of Egypt alongside her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII, whom she was forced to marry as per tradition. But real power was never meant to be shared. The court quickly turned against her, and she was exiled from the palace, left with no army and no allies. But Cleopatra wasn't the type to accept defeat. She began to gather support outside of Egypt and waited for the right moment to return. That moment came in the form of a Roman general, Julius Caesar. Rome, the rising superpower of the world, had its eye on Egypt. And when Caesar arrived in Alexandria, Cleopatra saw her chance. Legend says she had herself smuggled into the palace in a rolled-up carpet, placed directly before Caesar. He was impressed not just by her looks, but by her presence, wit, and charm. Soon, the two became allies, then lovers. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra reclaimed her throne, and her brother drowned in the Nile under suspicious circumstances. Just like that, the exiled girl became queen once more. Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar gave her temporary stability, but her ambitions stretched far beyond surviving. She wanted Egypt to remain independent, powerful, and respected. She gave birth to Caesar's son, named Caesarion, and dreamed of a future where their bloodline could unite the East and West. When Caesar was assassinated in Rome, Cleopatra returned to Egypt, now a widow and single mother, surrounded once again by political threats. But soon another Roman figure entered her life, Mark Antony, a bold and passionate general who shared her love for power and vision. Their partnership was both political and personal. Together, they challenged Rome, dividing territories and even declaring Caesarion as the true heir of Caesar. To some, they were dangerous. To others, they were dreamers building a new world. Cleopatra wasn't just a lover or a seductress. As history often paints her, she was a strategist, a ruler who dared to challenge the greatest empire the world had seen. Her influence reached beyond the Nile into Rome, into legend. But love and politics rarely mix without consequences. Mark Antony's relationship with Cleopatra caused division in Rome. His rival, Octavian, soon to be Augustus Caesar, used their alliance as a weapon, declaring them enemies of the Roman state. What followed was a brutal power struggle. In the famous Battle of Actium, Roman and Egyptian forces clashed at sea. Cleopatra and Antony's fleet was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. They lost. Their armies scattered. Their dreams died. Back in Egypt, the end came quickly. Octavian invaded. Facing capture and humiliation, Mark Antony took his own life. Cleopatra, now alone and defeated, followed soon after. According to legend, she used a poisonous asp, a snake hidden in a basket of figs, to end her life. Whether true or not, her suicide became one of the most iconic moments in ancient history. With her death, Egypt's long line of pharaohs ended. The kingdom became a Roman province. The era of queens was over. The Nile flowed on, but the crown was gone. Cleopatra's body has never been found. Her tomb remains a mystery, possibly hidden under the ruins near Alexandria or lost forever to time. But her story refuses to disappear. For centuries, she's been written about, painted, filmed, and imagined. Some see her as a romantic, others as a manipulator, and some as a tragic heroine. But above all, she was a queen who lived fully, ruled boldly, and died on her own terms. Her story is filled with triumph and loss, love and war, beauty and strategy. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, but perhaps the most remembered. In her life, she fought to protect her people, her son, and her legacy. In her death, she became a symbol of female power, of resistance, of the price of greatness. Cleopatra's story reminds us that history is not always fair, that the strongest voices are often turned into myths, but her voice still echoes through books, ruins, and every woman who dares to rule her world. Long before the days of Cleopatra and Nefertiti, Egypt faced a terrifying enemy, the Hyksos. These were foreign rulers who had taken control of northern Egypt during a time of weakness and division. They brought new weapons, ruled with force, and treated native Egyptians as second-class citizens. The land was broken. The temples were silenced. The throne was no longer fully Egyptian. But in the southern region of Thebes, a royal family was preparing to fight back. At the heart of that resistance stood Queen Ahhotep, a woman whose bravery would one day save Egypt. She wasn't just a queen. She was the wife of Pharaoh II and mother to future kings. But when her husband was killed in battle, his skull later found with deep axe wounds, Ahhotep didn't mourn in silence. She rose. With her sons too young to lead, she stepped forward to guide the resistance. A queen became a commander. Ahhotep wasn't trained as a warrior, but her heart burned with purpose. She kept the kingdom united while the enemy was at the gates. She spoke to generals, gave orders, and inspired soldiers to keep fighting. It was said that her words had the power to lift morale, that her presence in military camps gave men courage. She refused to let Egypt surrender. Her son, Kamose, soon took up arms as pharaoh and continued the war against the Hyksos, but his reign was short and he died young. Once again, the throne was unstable, and once again, Ahhotep held everything together. She raised her second son, Ahmose I, to become the true liberator of Egypt. She educated him, guided his training, and prepared him for the crown. All the while, she kept the kingdom strong from within, managing politics, temples, and alliances. While others saw only danger, she saw destiny. She didn't just give birth to a king, she raised a warrior king who would one day drive the Hyksos out forever. There are few records from Ahhotep's time, but what remains tells us she was deeply respected. One inscription found on a stela praised her as someone who cared for Egypt, looked after its soldiers, and restored order. These are not words normally used for a royal wife. These are words for a ruler. Her leadership was not flashy, but it was powerful. She didn't wear a warrior's helmet, but she led with the same strength. Some historians believe she may have even taken part in battles herself, as symbols of military honor were found buried with her, including weapons and medals usually reserved for soldiers. She also played a key role in keeping religion alive during the Hyksos rule, ensuring the gods were honored and temples protected, even when resources were low. In every sense, she acted as both queen and general. Her loyalty to Egypt was unmatched, and her people never forgot her. She didn't claim power for herself, she held it for Egypt. Thanks to Ahhotep's leadership, her son Ahmose I grew strong, wise, and determined. With her support, he led a final campaign to crush the Hyksos and reclaim the lands of the Nile. When victory came, Egypt was reborn. The Hyksos were defeated, their cities destroyed, and the Egyptian throne was fully restored. This moment marked the beginning of the New Kingdom, the most powerful and prosperous era in Egypt's long history. And at the root of this victory was Ahhotep, the woman who never gave up, even when surrounded by loss and chaos. She lived to see her son become pharaoh. She lived to see Egypt free again. And she lived to be honored not just as a queen, but as a savior. In her old age, she was treated with the respect usually reserved for gods. Her tomb held treasures fit for a pharaoh, including a dagger, a battle axe, and 3 golden flies, symbols of bravery and endurance. Her legacy became the foundation upon which future queens would stand. Ahhotep's story is not one of romance or royal drama. It is a story of resilience, leadership, and unmatched courage. She did not seek glory, but when the throne was empty, she stepped up. When armies needed strength, she gave it. When Egypt needed hope, she became its voice. She is proof that queens did not need to wear golden crowns. To rule, they needed only a will of iron and a heart of fire. Her name is not as famous as Cleopatra or Nefertiti, but without Ahhotep, there might never have been an Egypt for them to rule. She lit the torch that others carried. She turned tragedy into resistance, resistance into victory, and victory into rebirth. Today, her story stands as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, true leaders rise, not with magic or myth, but with love, loyalty, and the refusal to give in. In the palaces of ancient Egypt, not everything was ruled by law or sword. Behind the grand halls and open courts, there were whispers, rumors of spells, omens, and dark rituals. And often, at the center of those whispers, stood a queen. Egyptian society deeply believed in the spirit world. Magic was not just a fantasy, it was part of daily life. Amulets protected babies, priests performed spells for the sick, and the dead were buried with words meant to guide them through afterlife. Queens, especially, were thought to have special access to divine power. They weren't just royal, they were sacred. Many of them were priestesses, trained in rituals and symbols from an early age. But power breeds fear, and when a queen became too powerful, too mysterious, or too misunderstood, people began to fear her for a different reason. They called her a witch, a manipulator, a curse. Whether true or not, these beliefs often shaped how these women were treated and how their stories were remembered. Queen Twosret was one of the last rulers of the 19th dynasty. She came to power during a time of great instability. After the death of her husband, Pharaoh Seti II, and the short rule of a child king, she seized control of the throne. She ruled as pharaoh in her own name, rare and dangerous in a world that still saw male power as divine. For a while, Egypt seemed calm, but then darkness followed. Famine swept across the land. The Nile stopped flooding properly, temples were looted, and cities began to crumble. Some said the gods were angry, and many looked to Twosret as the cause. Her enemies began to whisper that she had brought a curse to the throne. Some claimed she had dabbled in forbidden rituals to gain power. Others said her rule was unnatural, and that Egypt was being punished for allowing a woman to sit on the throne alone. Whether it was coincidence or rebellion, Twosret's reign ended in violence. She was overthrown, possibly murdered, and Egypt fell into chaos. Her tomb was never finished. Her name faded, but her legend as a queen of dark times remained. Another eerie story comes from the Old Kingdom. Long before Cleopatra or Nefertiti, Ankhesenamun II was a queen who married two pharaohs, and her son later became one of the last great rulers of the 6th dynasty. She was wise, influential, and lived through multiple generations of royal rule. But legend connects her to a much stranger tale. In later magical texts, she's mentioned in connection with ancient spells, specifically one involving a snake that could speak. In this story, part history, part myth, a high priest performs a ritual before the queen, and a magical snake is brought back to life. It speaks secrets of the past and prophecies of doom. Whether this tale reflects real beliefs about her, or was simply a symbol of her mystical status, it shows how queens were often placed at the center of magical storytelling. The connection between queenhood and the unseen world was strong. To the people, a queen like Ankhesenamun was not just royal, she was a link between the living and the divine. A woman who could hear what others could not. Not all magic was about snakes and curses. Some queens were accused of using more personal, emotional spells, especially love magic. In a world where marriages were often political, controlling someone's heart could mean controlling their decisions. Ancient texts speak of women, sometimes royal, who used charms, perfumes, or secret incantations to win favor with kings or to curse their rivals. One story tells of a lesser queen who was accused of poisoning her stepson to make way for her own child to rule. Another speaks of a palace woman who used spells to blind her rival and take her place in the king's arms. These stories may be fiction, or they may be exaggerated versions of real court plots, but they reveal a deep fear, the fear that queens, with their beauty and mystery, had powers that no one could truly understand or stop. In a world ruled by men, a woman's ability to bend fate even through love was both fascinating and terrifying. Why were so many queens linked to magic or curses? Part of it was real belief. Ancient Egyptians truly saw the queen as a sacred figure, with power that touched the gods. But part of it was fear. A woman who ruled was already breaking tradition. A woman who ruled well was even more dangerous. People needed to explain her strength, so they blamed magic. Over time, these fears became legends. And those legends became stories passed through generations. Some of these queens were just smart, bold, or lucky. Others may have truly believed in the power of spells and signs, but all of them lived with the weight of superstition pressing against their crowns. Today, we can't always tell where truth ends and myth begins, but we can feel the tension they lived with. They walked through palaces filled with gold, but also with shadows. They smiled at courtiers who whispered behind their backs. They ruled kingdoms, but could never rule the stories people told about them. These queens remind us that power often comes with a price, and mystery is sometimes more dangerous than truth. In the earliest days of Egypt, queens were treated like goddesses. They were the mothers of kings, the wives of gods, the priestesses of sacred temples. Their names were written in gold, their images carved beside pharaohs. But as centuries passed and dynasties changed, that honor slowly faded. Queens became more controlled. Their titles lost meaning. In some cases, they were pushed into silence tools in political marriages, shadows behind younger rulers. Their stories began to vanish from records. The walls that once told their victories were broken. The statues that once held their faces were buried. Power shifted more and more into the hands of generals, priests, and foreign rulers. And the royal women, once celebrated as protectors of the land, were now seen as pawns in larger games. From glory, they fell into silence. From sacred to forgotten. As Egypt weakened, outside powers began to take interest. First came the Libyans, then the Nubians, then the Assyrians, and finally, the Persians. Each time a new force entered Egypt, the role of the queen changed. These foreign rulers didn't always understand or care for Egypt's traditions about royal women. Some kept local customs for the sake of control, but the real power was slipping away. Even when a queen was crowned, her influence was limited. The temples, once protected by queens, were now run by new powers. The lands once given to royal women were seized. The idea of queenship was no longer tied to divinity or national pride. It was political, temporary, and often meaningless. Egypt had once been ruled by queens who led armies and shaped empires. But now, they watched from the sides, powerless, as the crown changed hands in foreign courts. The final blow came from the West Rome. When Cleopatra died in 30 BCE, she took with her the last breath of Egypt's royal bloodline. There were no more native rulers, no more crowns passed from mother to daughter. Egypt became a Roman province. The queens were gone, and in their place came governors, soldiers, and taxes. Temples were shut down or repurposed. The language of the people changed. Greek, then Latin, replaced ancient Egyptian in the courts. Over time, even the memory of the queens began to fade. Their names were no longer taught. Their stories became myths. Their tombs were sealed, broken into, or lost. For nearly 2,000 years, the women who once ruled the Nile disappeared into the sands. Cleopatra became a legend. Nefertiti became a mystery. Hatshepsut was erased completely. And all the others, Ahhotep, Tiye, Twosret, Ankhesenamun, became whispers, if remembered at all. The loss of the royal bloodline wasn't just about power. It was about vision, balance, and identity. Egyptian queens had once brought harmony between the people and the gods. They had helped stabilize the kingdom during war, acted as spiritual leaders, and carried on the traditions of their ancestors. When they vanished, Egypt lost more than just rulers, it lost memory. The female perspective was gone from the stories written by priests and scribes. The statues that once stood proudly beside kings were smashed or ignored. The tombs that had been planned with care were looted or forgotten. The idea that a woman could lead with strength, grace, and wisdom was no longer part of the culture. For generations, history told only half the story. The rise and fall of Egypt was explained through male kings, battles, and buildings. But the queens, the ones who loved, lost, ruled, fought, and sacrificed, were left in the dark. And yet, they were never truly gone. The stones kept their names. The ruins remembered their stories. The statues buried in dust still held their faces. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists began to uncover what time had tried to hide. They found inscriptions of queens once erased. They discovered tombs filled with royal women's treasures. They translated letters, reliefs, and carvings that spoke of love, power, betrayal, and resilience. Bit by bit, the queens of Egypt rose again, not from death, but from silence. Their bloodlines may have ended, but their legacies did not. Today, we speak their names once more. We tell their stories not as side notes in a king's journey, but as journeys of their own. Because even though their crowns were stolen, their stories survived. And in those stories lives a deeper truth. That power, once held by women so fiercely, never really dies. It only waits to be remembered. These queens were never meant to be forgotten. Their names were once spoken with reverence, their presence honored in temples, their decisions shaping the lives of millions. They ruled empires, influenced kings, walked through fire, and stood tall when the world tried to silence them. They were not simply beautiful faces or royal companions. They were visionaries, warriors, mothers, priests, builders, diplomats, and rulers. Each one, in her own way, carried the weight of a kingdom, and often paid the price for doing so. And those centuries buried their stories beneath sand and time. Their power was never truly lost. They live on in broken statues, in ancient scrolls, in the echoes of the ruins, and now in the hearts of those who listen. What makes these stories matter today is not just their history, but their humanity. These women faced the same things so many still face now: being underestimated, being forced to prove their worth again and again. They navigated systems built to hold them back, made choices between love and duty, and carried wounds that never fully healed. From Hatshepsut's boldness to rule as pharaoh, to Ankhesenamun's desperate plea for safety, to Cleopatra's final act of defiance, each story reflects the universal fight for voice, respect, and freedom. These were not fairy tale queens in perfect lives. These were real women in impossible situations who dared to lead anyway. True power isn't always a crown or a throne. Sometimes it's a whisper in the shadows, a letter sent in secret, a hand on a king's arm during a moment of doubt, a voice that speaks when silence is safer. These queens showed us that leadership comes in many forms. Tiye ruled through wisdom. Ahhotep led through war. Nefertiti ruled beside her husband in equal strength. And even the lesser-known queens, like Twosret or Ankhesenamun, found ways to shape the world around them, even when history tried to erase them. They weren't perfect. Some made mistakes. Some fell. Some were feared. But they were always powerful in their own right, and in every choice they made, they left behind something that mattered, a story worth remembering. For thousands of years, these queens were reduced to footnotes. Their monuments were destroyed, their tombs hidden, their names scraped off stone. But now, slowly, their silence is being broken. Historians are uncovering new truths. Writers are telling their tales, artists are painting them anew, and millions of people across the world are hearing their names for the first time, not as forgotten figures, but as central heroes in one of the world's greatest civilizations. It was just the pause before the return. Before the world remembered that queens once ruled the Nile with pride, strength, and grace, and that no amount of time can truly bury a legacy built in courage. So here, at the end of this journey, we stand where they once stood beside the river, under the sun, in the land of gods and gold. We have walked through their palaces, fought through their battles, wept with their losses, and risen with their victories. We remember Hatshepsut, who dared to take the title of king; Nefertiti, whose beauty masked sharp brilliance; Tiye, who guided generations; Ankhesenamun, whose pain still echoes; Cleopatra, who gambled with empires; and so many more, each one a chapter in Egypt's long golden story. Their bodies may be gone, their tombs may be silent, but their stories have returned. Their names are spoken again. And with every telling, they rise, not as ghosts of the past, but as symbols of what women have always been capable of: power, wisdom, fire, queens, always